Hi, in this video I'm going to show you the full process of this illustration from Orbin Tales. While I work on it, I'd also like to tell you a bit about the world of Orbin that I'm building. But before we start, just a reminder that you can download my free brush set. They're compatible with the main drawing and illustration tools. The application I use for illustrating is called Krita, and it's free. You will find all the links in the description. Here on the left, you'll be able to see the brush I'm using at any moment, and also the current color. If you have any questions or suggestions, you can write them in the comments under the video. You can also join my Patreon or the Discord channel. All the info is also in the video description. So let's start the process. If you have already seen any of my previous videos, you will know that I always start with the flat brush for the sky. The idea is to build the sky gradient, little by little. It doesn't have to be perfect. That's why it feels more like traditional painting. As I said at the beginning, from now on, I'd also like to explain a bit more about the details of Orbin's world. Orbin is the character I created. He is a young apprentice mage who lives in a world where the magic exists. But it's not epic magic or magic tied to huge powers. It's everyday magic. Magic is just another tool, and being a mage in Orbin's world isn't any more important than any other job. As I mentioned at the beginning, I like keeping this traditional brush stroke style. That gives the image a warmer feel and more traditional effect. In fact, the brushes I use, the ones in my brush set, were created with that purpose in mind, to have a very traditional look and be used following traditional techniques or at least traditional processes. They are brushes that require a bit of technique, but once you master them, they create a very beautiful traditional painting effect with a paper-like texture. For me, they are the perfect brushes, at least for my style and for the techniques I usually use, which, as I said, are based on traditional painting processes, painting with strokes, color and not much else. In this illustration, what I want is to create a sort of a cover or introduction to the world of Orbin. It's very inspired by the first scene of Zelda Breath of the Wild, when Link comes out of the cave and the whole landscape is rebuilt. I also want to show that Orbin's world is a nature-based world, where landscapes and vegetation are very important. I already have many illustrations of Orbin's world, but none of them really follow a clear narrative, thread, or share common element. From now on, what I want to do is start building Orbin's world with things that are more connected to each other and recurring elements. For the clouds, I'm not going to overcomplicate things. I'm just going to paint a few clouds with a perspective effect to give a sense of depth and distance. To paint this kind of clouds, the most important thing is the perspective itself, not so much the exact shape, because as you can see, they're just simple strokes without much control. As long as they follow that perspective idea, making the ones in the distance smaller and the closer ones gradually larger, you already get that effect. Later on in the next steps, I will blur them a bit to give them a softer cloud look. But for now, I will leave them more or less like this, mainly to establish the sky effect. I might tweak them a bit because I'm not totally convinced by that cloud all the way at the top, so I might erase it or change it a little. Okay, now I will create a new layer and start painting the mountains. They are going to be the kind of mountains that are full of vegetation, lots of forest, very dense with trees. Orbin's world is very lush, very full of trees, vegetation, forests, and that's what I want to convey in this image. The best brush for this, at least to start with, is the General Soft. It's a brush with a rounded, soft shape. It's very good for creating the first shapes. It also works very well at large sizes, so it's ideal for filling large areas and adding textures. I'm not yet completely sure about the detailed shape of the mountains, but I'm going to go with the flow and define the form as I paint the highlights. As you can see, once I created the general shape of the mountains, what I do next is to add color variations to the texture. Creating color variations in textures or surfaces is one of the most important things in this anime-inspired style. It's about constantly making small adjustments to the color, brightness or contrast, and time to time making a slightly bigger change by mixing it with the background color. As for the lighting, the sun isn't shown here, but in theory it's in the central area of the image. I didn't want to place the sun in its usual position, in the center slightly to the right, because I'm going to place the Orbin Tales title, the logo, in the center, and I want that area to be free for the logo. As you can see, the process is to paint little by little, not with big strokes, just gradually adding texture to the mountains and sculpting their shapes with small strokes. This can be done in different ways. I started with a dark base color and worked up towards the lights. You can also do it with the other way around. Start with a light base and paint the shadows on top, adjusting the lights according to the shadows you lie in. But I usually prefer to start from dark and work towards light, adding the highlights slowly. As for Orbin's world and its magic, the idea is that Orbin's mission, his goal, his story is that he's dedicated studying magic, to being an apprentice. And magic is studied through the ancestors, because it's believed that the ancestors, back in their time, were very skilled in magic. They left behind temples and ancient ruins, and in those ruins there are inscriptions they carved. By studying those inscriptions, Orbin or any mage who discovered those ruins can study and decode them and learn new magical techniques and new spells. That's what Orbin's world is meant to explore, and what will happen in the illustrations I want to create from now on. His journey discovering new ruins, new towns, and new characters that I already have in mind. And as I mentioned at the beginning, since this isn't an epic or very spectacular magic, the idea is for it to be a very calm, relaxing kind of story. Orbin has a pretty contemplative and peaceful life overall. There is no revenge story behind it, no fight against some evil being, not evil enemy in Orbin's sights, nothing like that. Orbin just travels the world, studies ruins, learns new spells, and since the magic is basic, everyday magic, what Orbin does is help people with their day-to-day problems, moving things, moving objects, transforming one thing into another, healing, making healing remedies, making potions. In the end, magic in Orbin's world is just that. It's just another trade. It's not more important than being a baker or any other profession, a carpenter or a blacksmith. But it's a trade that's more about exploration, research and study. Okay, here you can already see that the mountains are taking shape. Now that the mountains are more defined, it's time to start detailing. We will start increasing the lights in the most illuminated areas and give a bit more shape to what we might call the curvature, the volume of the mountain. For this level of detail, where we're beginning to define the forest of the mountains, it's a good idea to choose this brush, distant trees soft or distant trees hard. They're basically designed with the shape of distant trees in mind, with that curved treetop silhouette that you typically see when you look at the faraway forested mountains. These brushes reproduce that effect. Up close it looks like a bit of jumble of spots, but when you zoom out, you will see how it gives that distant forest effect. In the end, it's all about generating the effect, not making a mountain or forest ultra realistic. You can see that it really does look like distant forest. And as you can see, you have to keep giving shape to the mountain. You can see the technique isn't extremely complicated. It's simply a matter of placing the strokes in the right place. Each stroke represents a small little tree in the distance. Okay, what I'm noticing now is that the mountains create a slightly odd repetitive pattern. So I'm going to erase the right area of the mountain group and change this area a bit to give it a better rhythm. Not such a uniform repetitive diagonal. Okay, the problem I have now is that I can't find the eraser icon. But by pressing the EK, you can erase using the current brush. So I'm going to erase this mountain to break the repetitive mountain range. And I'm going to create a bigger mountain here at the right hand to follow the curvature of the sky. This shape of the mountains allows me to add at this gap a bigger mountain at the center. And we continue with the same technique. Start with darker color and adding light little by little. In almost all my videos, people ask me about what kind of tablet I use for Illustrate. I use this ShenSlab 16. For me, it's one of the best tablets of this kind of tablets. It works really well, but honestly, you can use any type of tablet, the one you feel more comfortable. This is a desktop or slate tablet. It doesn't have a screen. You just draw on the tablet's surface and the cursor moves and paints on your monitor. I mainly use this kind of tablet mainly for the position while I'm drawing, to sit properly on my chair and stay on my desk like I moving a mouse. I've been using for many years screen tablets like Wacom screens, iPads, high Huion screens, and after long drawing sessions, my back and neck always ended up hurting. I actually started illustrating with this type of tablet. But of course, as you gain experience, you want something more. And usually that more, what you think is better, is going for something more technologically advanced. And many times you really don't need such expensive or advanced tools to illustrate well or create this kind of professional illustration. It does feel more natural to paint directly on a screen, seeing how the stroke appears directly under your pencil. That's true, but in the end you will get used to everything, and I have no problem illustrating with this kind of tablet. All my latest illustrations, these from Orbin and many more complex ones, have been painted with this ShenSlab tablet, and it works very well. I use this ShenSlab model right now, but I have another one from the XP Pen brand, and it works like this ShenSlab. Both are very good drawing tablets. Okay, as I mentioned before, here is the mountain I had in mind. A bigger mountain in this gap between mountains. I will give to this mountain a few more striking color touches to give it a bit more presence. And later I will add some clouds between the different planes to separate this mid-ground forest area from the background and from the foreground that I will paint afterward. The technique here is the same as before. Paint a darker background color first. In this case, since it's very distant mountain, I've used a violet tone mixed with the blue background, and then I gradually shape it with lighting. Because this is a more peak-shaped mountain, I'm going to give it a bit of rocky texture. A more rocky mountain, less forested. This will also give it that touch of color I want, so that it stands out a bit more from the foreground forest. Since this mountain is quite a distant element, we will use less saturated color in general, mainly because of the atmospheric occlusion. The atmospheric occlusion is like a filter that the atmosphere places over distant elements. In this case, since it's a broad daylight scene, a sunny scene with a very vibrant blue sky, everything in the distance will be seen with that bluish filter. So as you can see, the greens in the distant trees have that slightly bluish, desaturated touch. So when we start raising the lights, we raise the brightness, but always staying within that bluish overall tone. You will see that none of the colors I use on this mountain, even in the areas that are in full sunlight, will be extremely saturated. Look at the color I'm using. Look at the color wheel at the triangle where the color point is. On the mountain, it gives a bit of brownish effect, but in reality it's always blue base. This is a very clear example of how important it is to learn about color theory and how to mix color. Here you can see I used a slightly more orange color, but I made a stroke over the background color and then picked the blended color, which resulted in a bluish grey tone, something that still gives that brownish effect on the background. But it's really a fairly desaturated grey. At this level of distance, you can see that the color selection area is quite saturated, and to add the final light touches to this mountain, just a few small strokes are enough. There is no need for a lot of details, because since it's so far away, too much detail isn't necessary. Okay, I'm going to add a few slightly more saturated touches of color to give it the final highlights, but without overdoing it. As I said, later I will add a bit more depth with a few clouds around it, but for now the mountains are okay. Now what I'm going to do is blur the clouds with the smudge tool. With just a few strokes you get the cloud effect and a little sense of movement. I'm going to erase a bit of the central cloud because I don't think it looks very good. Okay, now what I'm going to do is to add a few trees in the foreground. On a new layer, I will use the treetop basic shape brush. This brush is great because it already gives you the shape of treetops at a closer level. Like almost all the brushes in the brush set, it's based on traditional brush strokes, which means it uses the same technique as with the mountain forest, short strokes and color variations. You can see I'm constantly changing the color to give the tree texture more richness. Of course, it requires a bit of practice. Pay attention to how I make the strokes. They are not random strokes. They are strokes that go, in this case, from bottom to top and from the center outwards to define the shape of the treetops. If you are interested in learning these techniques in more depth, I have an anime style course available in my digital store. It's a course of about 7 hours in which, apart of explaining an illustration that's much more complex and complete than this one, I go in depth into each phase and process. For example, I explain in a structured, step-by-step way how to paint trees of this type. I also explain how to illustrate architectural elements and basically more in-depth techniques to better understand the anime style. On my Patreon, I also have several more detailed tutorials on many anime style elements like clouds, grass, mountains, and there I explain these anime style digital illustration techniques in a more schematic way, in text posts with resources such as the original files. All those tutorials are there if you want to take things a step further. I have learned a lot simply by watching process videos like this from other artists. I have learned many techniques simply by imitating them and repeating them, practicing continuously until I understand the techniques itself and could start applying on my own. But it's true that a tutorial that teaches you the process and helps you to understand the technique step by step is much faster than watching a process and trying to figure out why they did things that way. So here the basic concept is to create color variations in order to create different trees within the group of trees. Different tree tops that will later add volume. Don't create a single mass of one flat color, because you will end up with something very flat, and it won't give you that small forest feel. In general, the technique of packaging colors, if you master it, is extremely useful for almost every element. And here it's time to start adding small details to the trees. I'm not going to go super detailed because I don't want to create an extremely detailed illustration. As I said at the beginning, I like this more traditional painting effect, with little details but where everything is still recognizable. That's the effect I want to achieve with this illustration, and it's the overall style I want for the entire Orbin Tales series. I used to add a lot of detail to my illustrations, and I really enjoyed that, because I like the process of detailing. But after finishing them, they didn't fully convince me. They didn't feel very warm or intimate. I wanted to imitate traditional technique, but I wasn't quite achieving it. I did have a lot of technique when it comes to illustrating landscapes, different grass textures and so on, but I wasn't convinced by the final painting effect. It was too digital. And about a year ago, I started to better understand what I need to do, which was to bring more traditional processes into the digital world. For example, what I've done in this illustration, starting with dark colors and gradually building up the lights, is what is normally done when painting with gouache or watercolor. In watercolor, not so much, because it often works the other way around. But in any case, it's that idea of starting with a light or dark base and gradually raising or lowering tones. What I mean is that what really helped me in the progress in this style is to applying the concept of traditional painting to my digital illustrations, and not trying to reach such a level of detail that in the end up stripping the illustrations to warmth and personality. Also, as in traditional techniques, continuously mixing colors or picking them from the pigment palette creates constant color variation. And that's also what has helped me improve technically and make the image look richer and more varied. Here on the trees, it's time to add the final light touches, playing with slightly more saturated, brighter tones, but without overdoing it. You don't want to abuse saturation because it creates a more unrealistic look. The more saturated tones should really be for specific elements in the image. The overall effect is built on less saturated, more muted tones, and the saturated touches are for the main highlights or central elements of the image. Okay, I think I will leave the foreground tree area as it is. Maybe I will tweak the colors a bit later, but I think it's fine for now. And now what I'm going to do is to add a few small strokes to simulate the tree branches. Not too many, just a few, so that if someone looks in more detail, they can see a branch here and there. Alright, I think we are on the right track. In this empty space on the left, what I will do is place the main element, like the rock or the cliff, where Orbin will be standing, looking toward the background. I am going to try tweaking the colors in the tree area a little. I already like how it looks, but let's see if we can give it a bit more contrast. I think I will add a bit more light to the brightest areas to separate them more from the background, because although I like it, it's a little dark, and maybe it needs to stand out a bit more from the background as well. So I'm going to pick slightly more saturated colors and just add small touches to the upper parts to give them that light accent. I'm going to retouch this area here, which looks a flat green patch that's a bit strange, because it draws too much attention. I will take a look at the background mountain and give it a bit more saturation to see how it looks. I will leave it like that, just a little. And now I'm going to look for the cloud brush to add more depth to the illustration. Now the idea is to add a bit of cloud or fog effect between the different planes of the landscape to give more depth and separate each layer a bit more. You don't need to be very precise because we will blur it later with the smudge brush and it will look like softer clouds. I am going to erase some of the clouds because I think they're too noticeable. And now with the smudge brush, we blur the clouds a bit so they look more like distant vaporous clouds. Now I'm going to do the same with the next plane, the closest one, to separate the mountain a bit more from the foreground tree area. You can see how the background mountain turned out. Thanks to that effect of placing clouds between layers, it looks a bit further away. And we use the same technique on the closer plane. With the close-off brush, I paint some random clouds with random shapes. No need to be too precise because I will blur them anyway. I'm just painting a cloud effect, especially around the edges of the element, to separate them more and give more sense of separation. The most important thing is to use different sizes and shapes. Don't make everything uniform. You can see that in the central area I have added some slightly smaller clouds, and I add a bit more brightness to give more sense of volume. Since these clouds are a bit closer, we can add a bit more detail. The effect is like painting mountains, but this time with clouds. You are giving them volume with light. Just a little light, no need for a lot of detail, since we will be blurring it anyway. It's just to show a slight separation between dark and light areas. And as before, with the smudge tool, we soften it a bit. Okay, I think it looks very good. Now I will add the Orbin Tales logo to see how the image composition looks. Since I'm going to add the character, the most important area, now I'm interested in seeing how the logo fits. It will be centered around here, in this area. That's why I mentioned earlier that I don't want to add the sun, so it doesn't interfere with the logo. I think it looks fine like that. Okay, now I'm going to move the logo layer to the top so it doesn't get in the way of the next layers. And what I want to paint next is the cliff where Orbin will be standing. It's similar to what I said before about Link looking out over Hyrule, where you can see the wall scene, the character standing on the cliff observing the landscape. Okay, I'm going to use the general soft brush to paint the base of the cliff, and I will paint it on a layer above the rest because it will be in the foreground. For the cliff I'm going to use warmer colors to contrast a bit with the cooler color in the background. Because it's the main element, the place where the character stands, the key element of the scene, I'm going to give it different color tones so that it stands out and draws more attention, becoming the central point of interest. I'm painting the cliff with a perspective effect, making it feel like it leads toward the background. This also invites the viewer to look towards the background, toward the same thing Orbin is looking at. This is a very classic composition, the typical hero composition, the main character looking into the distance from a cliff that also points toward the background. It's a very common composition to present walls, to present characters, and to introduce the initial storytelling of what's to come. What I want to represent in this image is a natural world, a fantasy world, a world with a lot of nature and a very scenic landscape. In the end, I'm a landscape and background illustrator, and I want the landscape to be an important element in all the scenes where Orbin appears. With this cliff, I have done the same as before. I start with a dark base and now gradually add light and adjust the shadows. I am always varying the colors to give it an interesting richness. I don't like how it's turning out, but I'm going to keep going and keep sculpting it little by little. If necessary, I can retouch it more. The good thing about digital painting is that you don't have to worry too much if it doesn't work the first time, because you can erase, retouch, add things, remove them. Okay, I'm starting to like it more now, but I will keep sculpting it, because it still needs a bit more work. I think it needs a flatter surface at the top, so there is more space to place the character. Okay, I few light touches here and there to give the impression of larger rocks scattered around the cliff. And now a bit of light on the top of the cliff to make it stand out a bit more, and also light touches on the bumps or little edges on the parts that stick out from the surface. Okay, something like that, more or less that amount. I think I will tweak it a little more later. Now I'm going to try changing the composition just to see how it looks. I will try placing the cliff on the other side, but I don't think it's a good idea, because it competes too much with the mountain above it. It's always good to try things to see how they look. After using Photoshop for so many years, I still find it a little difficult to find certain things in Krita. Okay, what I want to do is to flip the cliff horizontally. Alright, like this. I'm going to move it a bit to the right. No, I don't think that's a good idea. As you can see, the cliff here on the right side doesn't look good because it competes with the mountain above it. It would not be a good idea to leave the composition like this, because then the left side is empty. There is no element of interest there. It's better to keep the composition with the cliff on the left, where it was originally. I will move it back and the main mountain on the right. That gives a more balanced composition, because you're balancing both sides. The composing element is a whole world in itself, a separate area of study, but the basis of composition in general is like a scale. It's about visualizing the elements and seeing that they are balanced, making sure no area of the image feels heavier than another. Often these are very subtle things, and you play with that, with subtle weights in terms of color, size, distance, to balance the composition. In this case, it's a very simple composition. The image is divided into two, with the main mountain on the right and the cliff with the main character on the left. These two elements balance the image. Now I'm looking at where to place the cliff and how to make it work from a perspective point of view. I will tweak it a bit and enlarge it so that it fills the left side. I will also change some small perspective details and add more colors so it looks better. The idea is for the shape of the cliff to point towards the background, toward the mountain in the distance, giving the viewer a visual direction. Okay, I think that's good. This is the perspective I was looking for, with the cliff pointing toward the background. Okay, from now on I have got the composition I like, and now it's a matter of adding more detail to the cliff. I am going to paint the shadows in a slightly bluer tone to give it more coherence, and I have added stones and small rocks to give it some texture. Now it's about adding more details to the cliff. Small rocks, shadows, indentations, cracks, and also adding color variations. Okay, it's looking pretty good. I'm going to try raising the saturation a bit to see how it looks. Just a little, not much. Okay, I think it looks good like that. I'm going to add a bit more light along the edge to separate it a bit more from the background. Okay, I think the cliff is not perfect for placing the character. I already have the character cut out from another illustration I did, so I will reuse that same one. I drag it in here, drop it in, and that's it. Now I'm going to place it in the right position. Okay, I'm going to place him here on the edge. Then I will add a bit of shading so he's better integrated. I'm also going to add the bird that always accompanies him. I still haven't given this bird a name, but I should. I need to think about it. But it's the bird that always travels with Orbin as his companion. I will place it on top of the nearby treetops. Okay, it has to be proportional to the distance. It will be something very small, like this. So it doesn't need to be very visible, it's just a little cute detail. Yes, here looks very good. Okay, and now I'm going to add a shadow under Orbin, so he blends better into the scene. I'm moving him a little closer to the edge. In a new layer under his feet, it's not going to be a super realistic shadow with the exact character shape, just a bit of shadow and that's it. I think now I'm going to tweak the shadow of the cliff a bit more. I'm going to make it a little darker so that it contrasts more with the background. Yes, a darker shadow contrasts better on this closer area. I'm also going to add a bit more detail to the rocks, which now are a bit too blurred. Because this cliff is the closest object, it needs to be a bit sharper and more detailed. Not too much, because what I want is to keep that painterly effect, but I want this part to look sharper. And I think it's almost finished. I'm going to add a bit of fog in the very foreground to create a bit more contrast and depth, but that's it. Just some strokes with the airsoft brush, and this generates more contrast between the cliff and the trees. and I think it's done. I really like the result and how it turns out. I get the effect I wanted, and it's a nice image to introduce Orbin and his world. So I hope you enjoyed the video, whether it was to learn how to illustrate, learn the techniques, or learn a little more about the history of Orbin. Because from now on, that's what I want to do. Keep building Orbin's world and explain it little by little in each video. If you want to support me, you will find all the links in the description. You can support me via Patreon or buying my illustrations via my print shops. So thank you very much and see you in the next video. Bye.